Noah and Kate, Chapter 34. The next morning, Noah wrestled closed the flaps of a cardboard box and tossed it unceremoniously off the bed of his pickup. It landed near Paige, who scooped it up and put it inside the storage unit Noah had rented on the outskirts of town. Callum was there, helping stack the boxes and a few bits of furniture inside the unit, and even Lily had shown up, although she mostly just stood around, surreptitiously checking herself out in the truck's side mirror or snapping photos of Noah with her phone. "Noah, you sure you want to keep this box of Legos?" Callum stuck his head out of the unit, squinting against the sun. "We could add them to the station's toy drive." "Yeah, fine, whatever," Noah said. He looked around at the rest of the boxes and bits of junk he'd carted over from his now empty apartment, and wondered, not for the first time, how he had managed to accumulate so much stuff. He'd thought moving out would be simple. A few boxes and DVDs, some winter clothes, his mismatched dishes, his Star Wars mug, the one that looked like Darth Vader with a handle, and that was about it. Where had the rest of this junk come from, and why the hell didn't he just throw it all out? Why was he loading it all into a storage unit in Cedar Lake, a place he hoped to see very little of in future? He didn't even attempt to answer that question. Lately, his own behavior had become a baffling display of weirdness, inscrutable even to himself, and so he didn't even bother trying to find out what he was doing or why. "Just pack up and go," he kept saying to himself, like a mantra. "Don't think, just do." He picked up another box marked socks and threw it, with a certain amount of force, against the door of the neighboring unit. The aluminum door rang out like it had been hit with a wrecking ball, and each of his three companions let out various noises of alarm. "Noah, what the hell?" Paige demanded. "Sorry," he muttered, without much conviction. "What's the matter with you?" she pressed. "You're acting like a jerk." "I think he's going to miss us," Lily said, resting her elbows along the edge of the truck bed and tilting her head up at him. When he looked down at her, she smiled and then pouted theatrically, dropping her head on her shoulder. "You are going to miss us, right?" He smiled his professional smile at her, the one he reserved for patients who were bugging the ever-loving crap out of him. Before she could pester him further, he handed her a box marked Nerf. "Could you scoot this inside for me?" She straightened up awkwardly, as if being asked to put a box away was the very last thing she'd expected. But she put her hands up and took it, carrying it inside the unit and dropping it just inside the door before returning to her station near the back tire. "Almost done here, I'd say," Callum offered helpfully. "You're staying at the station till you go, right?" "Yeah, I guess." "You guess?" Paige's brow furrowed. "You gave up your apartment a few days early and didn't figure out where you were going to sleep?" He shrugged. He didn't feel like announcing that he had been hoping to spend the last few nights at the cabin with Kate, especially now that he wasn't altogether sure he'd be welcome there. "Cut it out, Kincaid," he admonished himself. "She's not into Mucus Lucas, no matter how much Mucus might be into her. Besides, if they were into each other, how could he possibly have a problem with that? It was just the way the guy had been so smarmy and smug and preppy and... Noah shuddered, remembering how Jeff had looked yesterday in his chinos and his expensive shirt, bragging about driving a performance car along the Amalfi Coast. Mr. CEO, Mr. Aerospace, Mr. Someone else will have to look after the house when you're gone. Acting like he owned Luna's place and had his eye on acquiring Kate as well. And Kate... Noah's stomach twisted a little as he thought about Kate sitting there beside Jeff, looking so fresh and pretty in her summer dress, smiling with genuine affection at Luna. She'd looked happy. At least when he'd first shown up, she had. When he'd barged in on their happy little domestic tableau and ended up arguing with her before he'd walked out. Jesus. Isn't this what he'd hoped for her? That she'd find someone and settle down, have a home and family and all the things she'd wanted for so long? He picked up a box that sounded like it contained random cutlery. Seriously, why the hell was he keeping a bunch of forks? And jumped down from the truck to carry it inside the unit. "You can crash with me if you want," Callum said. "Me couch is Sue couch." "Oh, hey, did you sell your motorbike yet?" Paige asked, then looked over at Lily. "Didn't Carl say he was interested?" "Yeah, Carl and I are kind of taking a break," Lily said, her voice rising at the end of the sentence. "He's in the city for the next few months, trying to get investors for his new gym. So we sort of decided to step back a bit, you know?" "Oh, I'm sorry," Paige said, and Noah knew how much she was struggling to appear saddened by the loss of Carl. "Oh, it's okay, really." Lily brushed it off. "We've never been, serious. More like summer fling, you know? Just having some fun for a while. No biggie." When Lily turned her dazzling smile on Noah, he suddenly knew that she, too, knew all about his and Kate's relationship. Heat flushed up his neck, the angry, embarrassed kind of heat that turned your whole head red, not just your cheeks. He looked over at Paige, but she was helping Callum shove a box of DVDs against the wall. Paige wouldn't have told Lily, of all people, and neither would Kate. It must be the curse of the small town at work. In a place like Cedar Lake, everyone knew your business, as if by osmosis, like they had just absorbed it through the ether. Or possibly Facebook. Mrs. J really loved Facebook. Noah turned his head away so no one could see his discomfort and wiped his hands over his face, as if he could erase the redness with a pass of a hand. Paige and Callum were busy discussing whether the word fragile could be safely ignored, but Lily had nothing else to rest her attention on, except him. "Noah, honey," she cooed, coming up behind him and putting her arms around his waist. He could feel her pressing her face against his back, and a sharp bit of one of her earrings stabbed into him. He gently removed her hands and turned around, only to be smothered in another hug. "I'm going to miss you so much. Do you know that?" He laughed awkwardly and tried to pry Lily off him, but she was clinging on to him like a baby gorilla. She started up again with just how bereft she was going to be without him when Callum and Paige came out of the unit. "Hey, if you aren't going to sell the bike, I could store it for you. My garage has enough room," said Callum. Just as he spoke, Paige started talking too. "Do you want to leave the keys to the unit with me, in case you want to get in here for something, or maybe just sell everything off? You can leave your truck at my place too, unless you want me to find a buyer for it. I've got to get just one more selfie with you, Noah, please. I'm going to miss this gorgeous face. It's not even half full. Maybe I can store a few of the bookshelves people donate. Would you mind?" "Enough," he shouted, silencing everyone. Lily stepped back, and Callum and Paige blinked at him, and suddenly the silence was a little too quiet. Noah wiped his hands over his face again and smiled ruefully. "Sorry, guys. I'm just a bit frazzled. Sorry." As a precaution, he moved away from Lily to prevent her from consoling him with another hug. "Oh, you," said Lily, sliding in beside him anyway and putting her head on his shoulder and her arm around his waist. "Of course you're frazzled. We understand." "Well, look, I think we're about done," said Callum, hands on hips, swiveling around to survey the neat towers of boxes in the mostly empty unit. He glanced over at Noah. "Anything else back in your apartment?" "Nope, that's it," said Noah. "Listen, thanks, guys. I really appreciate your help. I don't want to keep you here all day. You can get going if you want." "Hey, no problem," said Callum. "Glad to help. Ladies, I'm heading back into town if you need a ride." Lily brightened. "Could you drive me to Dunmore? I got an extra shift at the restaurant, but my car's in the shop. I would be so grateful." Noah sucked in his bottom lip with his teeth and looked away, hoping not to meet Callum's eyes. If he did, he just might start laughing. Callum had walked right into that one. You never offered to do anything for Lily. She was the queen of taking a mile when given an inch. Several miles, in fact. Dunmore was a good 20-minute drive each way. Callum's eyes flickered a bit, but he smiled. "Sure, I can do that. Paige, you want to come with?" "You guys go ahead." She tipped her chin over at Lily. "I'll get a ride back to the store with Noah." Poor Callum. Noah thought. The girl he really wanted to share a car with was staying behind, and the one who would probably end up weaseling money out of him, plus gas station snacks along the way, had suckered him into a road trip. But Callum was a decent guy, as always, and he accepted his plight cheerfully. He shook Noah's hand. Noah was eternally grateful that Callum wasn't the bro-hug type, with the back clapping and the complicated hand gestures, and he and Lily climbed into his car and drove off. If Paige was bothered by any of this, or by the fact that Callum didn't say goodbye to her, or even throw her a casual wave, she didn't show it. This made a little knot of something unpleasant curl up in Noah's belly, though he couldn't quite say why. He wandered into the unit and surveyed the collection of boxes as Paige grabbed a broom and swept up a pile of leaves that had gathered in the corner. She swept when she was nervous, Noah realized, as if by cleaning up her immediate surroundings, she could brush away her emotions, too. He went over and put his hands around her waist, dropping his head to rest on her shoulder. Normally, she'd shake him off her with a "cut it out, dork," or even a basic "ew." But now she stopped sweeping and stood still, tilting her head slightly to rest against his. They stood there for a full minute before she spoke. "I'm going to miss you," she said. "I really hope you'll come back someday." "Of course I will," he said. "It's not like we're never going to see each other again." She let out a derisive half-laugh, as though she were too worn out to go for full scorn. "Well, we'll see about that." "I'll always be your big brother," he added, and didn't bother adding the "by 6 minutes" that teenage Paige had always insisted on. "And I think our WSP is pretty finely tuned. If you ever need me, I'll come running." This made Paige hold him even tighter, and he felt, rather than heard, her little intake of breath. He had said it to make her feel better, but it seemed to have had the opposite effect. "You're going to be okay, kiddo," he said softly, in a voice that didn't quite sound like his. He stroked the back of her hair lightly. She sighed and turned around, her eyes now a brighter, shinier blue. "I know. I don't think I told you, but I made a decision that I think is really going to improve things." "Oh?" Why did his mind immediately wing over to that car motoring its way to Dunmore with a different girl in the passenger seat? "Something you care to share?" "You know that big empty store next to the bookshop, that old ladies' wear place, Lillian's?" He frowned. "I think so. The one that looks like it froze solid in 1958? She laughed. "Yeah, that one. I spoke to the owner, and I'm going to be taking over the space. I'm going to expand Lizzie and Fitz." Noah's face broke into a broad smile. "That's amazing. That place is huge. You'll have more than enough room for all those bookshelves people keep donating." Paige grinned. "Yes, and people will finally be able to walk through the aisles without tripping over Stephen King. But I'm mostly doing it to add a larger gathering space for groups like the Agathas. I've drawn up the plans already. There'll be enough room to hold seminars and even classes, like that CPR class you gave at the senior center." "That's incredible, Paige, seriously," he said. His brotherly, or maybe it was just manly, concern couldn't help but perk up and raise a timid hand. "That's a big project. Are you sure you can afford it?" "Yes, I can afford it. The store's been doing really well, and since I'm saving so much by living upstairs, I've built up quite a little nest egg. Besides, Callum's going to help me with the renovations. We're going to try and do a lot of it ourselves." He tried to control his facial features, he really did, but the sudden surge of happiness he felt at the idea of Paige and Callum working together on a reno project made him almost giddy with joy. He could picture the two of them in paint-splattered white coveralls, flicking paint at each other and laughing like they were in some Hallmark movie. And everyone knew that in Hallmark movies, those who renovate together usually end up doing much more together. He knew he should probably leave the subject of Callum alone, but he couldn't help himself. "So you're warming up to Callum, then?" Even he could hear the hope in his voice. "Maybe you might give him a chance?" "Oh, for God's sake," Paige said irritably and pulled away from him. But she was trying to hide a smile, to varying degrees of success. I should just marry him already so everybody will stop bugging me about it. Noah's eyebrows rose, and he was about to speak when she put up an imperious finger. Kidding. Just kidding. Jeez. Okay. He held up his hands in surrender. I'm just saying, he's a great guy, and he's crazy about you. You might be missing out on something really special. Now it was her turn to raise her eyebrows at him. Or rather, one eyebrow. The deadly one. You're so right. It could be something special. By the way, where's Kate? Why isn't she here helping? The question could have been a simple inquiry, but it wasn't. It was loaded, weighed down with meaning, and along with the penetrating gaze Paige was pinning him with, he grew uncomfortable. I didn't ask her, he finally answered. I thought it might be, difficult. Paige nodded slowly, her eyes assessing him in that frank way of hers. She was activating her WSP, and it made him squirm even more. Look, I'm not going to give you a hard time, she said, reading his mind like a true virtuoso of the twin clairvoyance arts. She closed her eyes when she said this and shook her head slightly. When she opened them, they were rimmed again with the shine of tears. I just wanted to say that I'm glad you and she got together, even if it was just for the summer. I've honestly never seen you happier or more relaxed. It's been so good to see. He lowered his gaze and then looked up and away, avoiding her eyes at all costs. He might just get all shiny-eyed too if he wasn't careful. I'm just going to say one thing, she said on a long sigh. For what it's worth, I think Kate loves you. In fact, I know she does. I think she's loved you since 5th grade, and listen to me, please, she said, chasing his eyes with her own as he tried to look away again. If you love her, which I think you do, you need to tell her. Just once, so she knows. I think she'd really love to hear it. Now he closed his eyes and felt his mouth go dry. God damn it, he wasn't ready for this kind of thing. It was hitting him too hard and making his head hurt too much. You know she won't ask you to stay. You know that. You know she wants you to be happy. I know. She hasn't had much love in her life. I think it would mean a lot to her. Jesus, Paige, he said, lifting his eyes up to the ceiling of the storage unit. His throat was aching now, and he tried valiantly to blink away the tears that threatened to spill. I'm not trying to make you feel bad, she said quickly, putting her hand on his chest. I just think love is important, you know? It's rare and wonderful and worth at least a few words of acknowledgement. His eyes clearing with effort, he looked back down at her and swallowed. Kiddo, that's what I've been trying to tell you all along. She blinked a few times and then nodded. Noah covered her hand with his own and squeezed. He didn't need to say anything more. They understood. After dropping Paige back at the store, Noah found himself driving over to Kate's cabin, not even knowing when he'd made the decision to go over there. His sister's words echoed through his mind, as if on a loop. She hasn't had much love in her life. The words sliced into him far more deeply than he might have imagined. Paige had been right. Kate's childhood had been unstable and lonely. Her dating life had been a complete disaster, and that earnest, naive, ridiculous attempt to find a marriage-minded guy had gone about as well as Noah could have predicted. She'd had the most colossal bad luck he'd even heard of, and she deserved none of it. She should have been adored as a child. She should have had a loving mother, at least, even if there'd been no father in the picture. She should have been just as popular as Paige back in high school. She shouldn't have had to face even one lonely Saturday night, or, and his stomach churned at this, have her first kiss from Mucus Lucas. He, Noah, should have been the one. He should have been the boy she wrote about in her diary, in every way. He should have fulfilled her dreams and been the fantasy boyfriend she had so sweetly, poignantly longed for. If he hadn't been such a doofus back then he would have seen what had been right in front of him the whole time, staying over at his house for sleepovers, wandering around in her flannel pajamas with her long hair all loose and gorgeous, shyly glancing at him with those beautiful eyes before quickly ducking away. He should have reached out for her then, and never let go. The truck's right front tire dropped off the road with a jolt, and he realized he'd been driving way too fast. He regained control and pulled over onto the shoulder, dust rising as the tires spit out gravel. He put his hands on the steering wheel and dropped his head on his hands. One thought began pounding against the confines of his skull. One loud, insistent, exasperated thought that replaced all others. Of course he loved her. Of course he did. But more than that, so much more than that, he was in love with her. And probably always had been. She was everything, wasn't she? She was smart and funny and beautiful and sexy. He'd always known she was, but now, somehow, everything had tilted. Everything looked different, smelt different, felt as foreign to him as if he'd been dropped into a strange new country. As though waking up from a dream, he saw her fully in his mind's eye now, and with a certain amount of shock he realized he'd always seen her this way, if only he'd known how to really look. The way her eyes glittered when she laughed, the way she tossed her hair over her shoulder when she wanted to get to work, that little crease that formed in the middle of her forehead when she concentrated. The calm, gentle way she had about her that nevertheless spoke of real courage and determination. The way genuine kindness and warmth radiated from her as though she were a little ember, a spark of love and benevolence and peace. The way her soft, warm body had felt as she curled against him in bed that one night, that night when he'd needed her comfort and her understanding so badly, when his world had been gripped by pain and grief and futility and a desperate need to forget it all and simply fall asleep in her gentle arms. That hesitant, shy, fierce little heart reaching out to his, loving him enough to hold back. He lifted his head up, and his heart pounded wildly in his chest. He was in love with Katie Malone. And instead of alarming him, the idea filled him with a kind of euphoria he had never known. For the first time in his life, he finally knew what it was to be genuinely in love, and the breathless enormity of it both scared and exhilarated him. This is what those words meant. This feeling that had begun to grow like a little sapling 15 years ago had finally blossomed into something solid and real and beautiful. Throwing the truck into gear, he pulled back onto the road. He was in love with her. Now all he had to do was tell her.